Subscribe for the full story.
My cousin mortgaged our shared family cabin behind my back. I bought the debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. The official-looking letter from the bank, detailing a mortgage I never agreed to, landed on my doorstep like a thunderclap on a clear day. My stomach plummeted, a cold dread seeping into my bones as I scanned the impersonal text. It spoke of property deeds, loan numbers, and a sum that made my breath catch in my throat. The address listed was unmistakable. Our family cabin, the weathered, beloved sanctuary nestled by the whispering pines, a place that held the ghosts of countless summer barbecues and whispered secrets. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a seismic shift in the foundations of my world. My cousin Mark, the one who always had a glint of something too eager in his eyes, was the named signatory on this audacious document. The sheer audacity of it, the brazenness of his deception hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a betrayal not just of shared ownership, but of shared memories, of a legacy I thought was as solid as the granite outcroppings surrounding our haven. This wasn't just about a building. It was about the unraveling of trust, the silent theft of a piece of my own identity. And if you're finding yourself gripped by this tale of unexpected twists and turns, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single word as this story unfolds. The initial shock, a blinding wave of disbelief and anger, quickly subsided, replaced by a chilling clarity. The cabin wasn't just a collection of wood and memories. It was a tangible asset, and Mark had leveraged it for his own hidden purposes. The letter itself was a stark testament to his desperation, a desperate gamble played out on the chessboard of our shared inheritance. The bank, efficient and unfeeling, had simply processed the paperwork, oblivious to the familial chasm it was creating. I reread the letter, my fingers tracing the precise wording, the legal jargon that suddenly held immense power. It wasn't a demand for immediate repayment. It was a statement of obligation, a ticking clock that was now counting down my own reaction. My mind, usually prone to overthinking, narrowed to a single, sharp point. I wouldn't crumble under the weight of this revelation. I wouldn't engage in the shouting match or the tearful accusations that would inevitably follow if I confronted Mark directly. That would be playing his game. This required a different approach, a calculated move born from the very financial instruments he had so carelessly invoked. The first logical step, the one that my rattled nerves screamed for, was to understand the scope of the damage. I picked up the phone, my hand surprisingly steady as I dialed the number for the mortgage department at the bank. Explaining the situation, the fact that I was a co-owner and had no knowledge of this loan, was a delicate dance. The loan officer, a woman named Sarah with a professionally soothing voice, listened with an air of detached efficiency. She confirmed the loan's existence, the principal amount, and the interest rate. It was substantial, enough to make even a seasoned investor pause. But as Sarah droned on about amortization schedules and default clauses, a different kind of thought began to take root. Banks, especially in these uncertain economic times, were often eager to offload non-performing or potentially problematic assets. Mortgages that were nearing delinquency or loans secured by properties with uncertain future value were sometimes sold off at a steep discount. Could this be one of those situations? I spent the next few days immersed in research, my laptop screen a blue glow in the dim light of my apartment. I delved into the world of distressed debt, of loan portfolios being traded like commodities. It was a labyrinthine market, filled with acronyms and specialized firms, but the underlying principle was simple: buy low, sell high, or in this case, buy low and gain control. I spoke to financial advisors, to people who dealt in the often unseen mechanics of debt. The consensus was clear. Unauthorized loans were tricky, but not insurmountable, especially if the original borrower was no longer servicing the debt. The key was to find out if the bank was willing to sell this particular loan, and if so, for how much. The thought of taking on Mark's debt, of becoming the creditor rather than a victim, was a powerful one. It was a way to not just protect the cabin, but to reclaim the narrative, to turn his betrayal into my strategic advantage. My investigation into Mark's motives was a secondary concern, though equally important. What was he doing with this money? The sheer amount suggested something more than just a casual loan. Was it gambling? A failed business venture? Or something even more sinister? The lack of communication from him since the letter arrived only fueled my suspicion. He was likely hoping I wouldn't find out, or that if I did, I would be too overwhelmed to act. He underestimated me. He always had. He saw my quiet nature as a weakness, my methodical approach as a lack of assertiveness. He was about to learn that sometimes the loudest roars come from the deepest silence, and the most devastating attacks are delivered with a calm, calculated precision. The cabin, with its creaking floorboards and the scent of pine needles, was more than just a place. It was a symbol of our family's shared history, and I would not let Mark's recklessness erase that. The time for passive observation was over. It was time to move. The hum of my laptop was a constant companion as I navigated the shadowy corners of the distressed debt market. Days bled into nights, fueled by strong coffee and an unwavering resolve. I'd learned the language of loan servicers, the subtle nuances between non-performing and sub-performing assets, and the art of the discreet inquiry. The initial shock had long since morphed into a steely determination, each piece of information I unearthed reinforcing the conviction that I was on the right path. Mark's betrayal, while initially devastating, had inadvertently handed me a unique opportunity. My calls to various debt acquisition firms were met with varying degrees of interest. Some saw an unauthorized loan as too complex, a potential legal quagmire they preferred to avoid. Others, however, recognized the potential leverage. The key, I discovered, was the bank's willingness to divest. Banks are in the business of lending, not of managing distressed individual loans that carry the whiff of fraud. They want to move these assets off their books, and often they're willing to do so at a significant haircut. After countless hours of research and a series of carefully worded emails, I finally found a firm that specialized in acquiring portfolios of secured debt from financial institutions. They were cautious, their initial response measured, but I had already gathered enough information to present a compelling case. I had the loan number, the principal amount, and critically, I had documentation proving my co-ownership of the cabin. I also had the crucial detail that the loan was taken out without my consent. The negotiations were intense. The firm, let's call them Apex Asset Solutions, initially offered a price that was still substantial. They argued the complexity of the situation, the potential for legal challenges, and the fact that the cabin, while a desirable asset, was also a single, isolated property. But I was armed with knowledge. I knew the average selling price for similar distressed loans, and I knew the bank's likely internal valuation for a quick sale. I pushed back, politely but firmly. I highlighted the bank's potential exposure if the unauthorized nature of the loan became widely known, subtly implying that my cooperation in acquiring the debt was a cleaner, quieter resolution for them. It was a delicate tightrope walk. I couldn't appear too eager, nor could I be perceived as a nuisance. The goal was to secure the loan at a price that felt like a victory, a true pennies-on-the-dollar scenario. After several rounds of back and forth, a figure was agreed upon. It was significantly less than the original principal, a testament to the bank's desire for a swift and discreet exit from a potentially messy situation. Apex Asset Solutions would acquire the loan, and I would then have the opportunity to purchase it from them at their acquisition cost, plus a small administrative fee. This was precisely the route I wanted. By acting through a third party, I insulated myself from the direct, potentially contentious transaction with the bank, and more importantly, I would be the one holding the note, not owing it. The paperwork was extensive, a thick stack of legal documents that felt both daunting and exhilarating. Signing them felt like a turning point, a concrete step towards rectifying Mark's egregious betrayal. The transaction was completed, and suddenly, the digital ledger reflected a new reality. I was the sole holder of the mortgage on our family cabin. The debt that Mark had incurred, the one that had threatened to tear apart a cherished legacy, was now mine to control. The power dynamic had shifted, and the icy grip of dread was replaced by a surge of potent, almost intoxicating control. Now came the crucial next step, confronting Mark. I didn't want to gloat, nor did I want to descend into the petty squabbles that would surely ensue if I revealed my hand too aggressively. I needed to present him with a choice, a clear path forward that leveraged my newfound position. I decided on a direct, yet measured approach. I invited him to the cabin, not for a heartfelt reunion, but for a serious discussion. The day arrived, crisp and cool, with the scent of pine needles filling the air. The cabin stood as it always had, a silent witness to our shared past. Mark arrived, his usual bluster slightly subdued, a hint of unease flickering in his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected me to act so quickly, or perhaps he'd hoped I would simply ignore the letter, leaving him with a temporary reprieve. "Mark," I began, my voice calm and steady as he settled onto the worn leather sofa, "we need to talk about the mortgage." He visibly flinched, his gaze darting away. "Oh yeah, that. Look, I was going to tell you." "When, Mark?" I interrupted, my tone still even. "After the bank foreclosed? After they kicked us both out?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated. I had some expenses. Expenses that involved leveraging our family legacy without my consent," I stated, my gaze locking with his. "Do you have any idea the trouble you could have caused?" He mumbled an apology, but it lacked conviction. "I didn't think you'd find out so soon. I thought I'd have time to fix it." "Fix it by what, Mark? Taking out another loan? Gambling away what little is left?" I stood up and walked to the fireplace, picking up a smooth gray stone that had sat there for years. "The thing is, Mark, I've already dealt with it." His head snapped up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Dealt with it? What do you mean?" I said, turning to face him, the stone held loosely in my hand, "that the bank sold the mortgage, and I bought it." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Mark stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. You bought it? The debt? How?" "I'm not going into the details, Mark. Suffice it to say, I handled it. And now the situation is different." He finally found his voice, a bewildered tone. "So what happens now? Are you going to make me pay you back? Are you going to sell the cabin?" I walked back to the sofa and sat down, the stone now resting on the coffee table between us. "No, Mark, I'm not going to sell the cabin. And I'm not going to bankrupt you trying to get you to repay me for a loan you took out without my knowledge or consent. That's not how I want to handle this." His expression shifted from bewilderment to a wary hope. "So what do you want?" "I want you to understand the gravity of what you did. I want you to acknowledge the betrayal. And I want us to come up with a plan for the cabin moving forward, one that we both agree on and one that we both contribute to." I picked up another stone, a darker, more jagged one. "The cabin is a shared asset, Mark. It always has been, and it needs to be treated as such." He looked at the stones, then back at me. The shock was slowly giving way to a dawning comprehension. He had underestimated me, as he always did. He had thought my quiet nature was a weakness, my methodical approach a sign of indecisiveness. He was wrong. He had played a dangerous game, and in doing so he had inadvertently handed me the ultimate winning hand. "What kind of plan?" he asked, his voice softer now, a touch of genuine contrition in his tone. "First," I said, placing the jagged stone next to the smooth one, "we need to be honest with each other. I know you were in financial trouble, Mark. What happened? I deserve to know, and frankly, so does this cabin." He hesitated for a long moment then. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his misdeeds, he began to speak. He confessed to a series of bad investments, a business venture that had gone spectacularly wrong, and a desperate attempt to cover his losses. He admitted to being ashamed, embarrassed, and utterly panicked. He had seen the cabin as a quick and easy solution, a way to access funds without involving anyone else. He had genuinely believed he could fix it before I found out. As he spoke, I listened, not with judgment, but with a focus on the underlying issues. His confession was a crucial step. It was an acknowledgment, however late and however reluctantly given, that his actions had consequences. It was the first brick in rebuilding the shattered trust. "All right, Mark," I said when he had finished, my voice still measured. "I appreciate your honesty. It's a start." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "Here's what I propose. The loan is now in my name, essentially. I've absorbed the immediate threat, but the cabin still needs to be maintained. And, frankly, it deserves better than to be a mere collateral in someone's desperate gamble." I outlined a plan. It involved a clear contribution from both of us for ongoing maintenance, taxes, and any necessary repairs. We would establish a joint account, funded by both of us, specifically for the cabin's upkeep. We would also discuss potential future uses of the cabin, perhaps renting it out for short periods to generate income, something we'd always vaguely considered, but never acted upon. "And what about you paying me back?" he asked, his voice laced with apprehension. "That's where we can be creative, Mark. Instead of a lump sum repayment for a loan you never authorized, we can frame it as your contribution to the cabin's future. Perhaps you can put in more labor, take on more of the physical upkeep. Or we can work out a structured payment plan, one that's realistic for your current financial situation. The point is, we're doing this together, as partners, not as debtor and creditor, but as co-owners who are committed to preserving this place." His eyes widened, a spark of relief igniting within them. This was a far more palatable outcome than he had anticipated. He had braced himself for anger, for financial ruin, for an outright banishment from the cabin he had so carelessly put at risk. Instead, he was being offered a path to redemption, a chance to rebuild his relationship with the cabin and with me. You're really willing to do that?" he stammered, a hint of genuine surprise in his voice. "I'm willing to work with you, Mark, because this cabin means too much to me and to our family to let your mistakes destroy it. But this is your one chance. This is your opportunity to prove that you can be a responsible co-owner, that you understand the value of what we have here, and that you're willing to put in the work to protect it." He nodded vigorously, a genuine smile finally breaking through his anxious facade. "Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes. I promise." We spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the cabin, discussing its needs, its potential, and the practicalities of our new arrangement. The air, which had been thick with tension and suspicion, began to clear. The scent of pine needles no longer carried a hint of dread, but the promise of renewal. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room floor, I felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. I had turned a potentially devastating betrayal into an opportunity for reconciliation and rebuilding. I had taken control of a narrative that Mark had tried to hijack, and I had rewritten it on my own terms. The cabin, once a symbol of his deceit, was now a testament to my resilience and my commitment to family, even when faced with difficult truths. The journey ahead wouldn't be without its challenges. Rebuilding trust is a slow and arduous process. There would undoubtedly be moments of doubt, of strained conversations, and of necessary reminders of the past. But for the first time since that official-looking letter arrived, I felt a sense of peace. I had navigated the treacherous waters of debt and deception, and I had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. The cabin, our shared sanctuary, was safe. And in a way, so was our fractured family. The whispers of the pines now sounded less like ghosts of the past and more like a gentle lullaby for the future. The conversation with Mark at the cabin was a watershed moment. The initial confrontation, carefully orchestrated, had yielded a surprisingly constructive outcome. He had confessed, acknowledged his fault, and most importantly, seemed genuinely contrite. The plan we'd sketched out, a joint account for cabin upkeep, a commitment to physical labor from his end, and a structured, albeit informal, repayment plan, felt like a fragile but tangible bridge across the chasm Mark had dug between us. Yet, as I drove away from the cabin that evening, the scent of pine still clinging to my clothes, a familiar unease gnawed at me. The ink on the new arrangement was barely dry, and Mark's history was a well-worn tapestry of broken promises. The following weeks were a delicate dance. I initiated the process of setting up the joint account, transferring a portion of the funds I'd acquired from Apex Asset Solutions to seed it. I sent Mark the details, a polite reminder of our agreement. He responded promptly, depositing his agreed-upon initial contribution. It was a small victory, a flicker of hope that perhaps this time things might actually stick. He also began to show up at the cabin with more regularity, not just for scheduled workdays, but on his own initiative, tackling minor repairs, clearing brush, and even repainting the weathered porch railings. His physical presence at the cabin, something that had once felt like an entitlement, now felt earned, a testament to his efforts. But beneath the surface of this nascent cooperation, the true extent of Mark's financial quagmire remained a murky, uncharted territory. His initial confession had been a broad stroke, a general outline of bad investments and a failed business venture. The specifics, the actual figures, the depth of the hole he'd dug himself into were still largely unknown to me. And the loan itself, while now under my control, still represented a significant amount of money. While I had purchased it at a substantial discount, the principal amount was still substantial, and the interest, even at a reduced rate, would accrue. The question of his repayment, framed as his contribution to the cabin's future, felt nebulous, relying heavily on his continued good behavior and his ability to generate income. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old family photographs in the cabin's attic, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment in an old writing desk. Inside, I found not just more sentimental clutter, but a slim, nondescript folder. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. It contained a series of bank statements, clearly belonging to Mark, dating back to the period when the unauthorized loan was taken out. My stomach plummeted. These weren't just statements reflecting a temporary cash flow issue. They painted a picture of a spiraling crisis. There were notices of overdrafts, letters from collection agencies for various debts, and, most disturbingly, several high-interest, short-term loan applications. The bad investments narrative felt increasingly like a convenient excuse, a smokescreen for a deeper pattern of reckless financial behavior. The implications were immediate and alarming. If Mark's financial situation was this dire, his ability to contribute to the cabin, let alone repay any portion of the loan, was severely compromised. My carefully constructed plan, built on the foundation of his contrition and his ability to contribute, now seemed precariously balanced. The thought of him simply using the cabin as a perpetual bailout, deferring his true financial responsibilities onto our shared legacy, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. I knew I couldn't confront him immediately with this newfound information. It would shatter the fragile trust we were beginning to build, and likely send him retreating into his shell, further obscuring the truth. Instead, I decided to shift my focus. My primary objective had always been the preservation of the cabin, and now, my secondary objective became a deeper understanding of Mark's financial reality, not to judge, but to strategize. I reached out to Apex Asset Solutions again, this time with a more specific inquiry. I explained that I was working on a long-term plan with the co-owner of the property secured by the loan, and I needed a clearer picture of the loan's terms and my obligations as the new holder of the note, should Mark default on our informal agreement. They were, as always, professional and forthcoming. They provided me with a detailed breakdown of the loan, including the original principal, the interest rate, the repayment schedule, and importantly, the clause regarding default. They also confirmed the terms of my purchase from them, reiterating that my acquisition was essentially a loan-to-own scenario, albeit one I was orchestrating myself. Armed with this knowledge, and the damning evidence from Mark's statements, I began to subtly probe him for more information. During one of our cabin work sessions, while we were sanding down an old wooden table, I casually mentioned how the market had been lately. "It's tough out there, isn't it?" I remarked, my voice light. "Heard a lot of businesses are struggling. That tech startup you were involved with, how did that pan out in the end?" Mark paused, his sanding motion faltering. That. It was a learning experience." He hedged, avoiding my gaze. "Market shifted. Competition was fierce." "Right," I said, picking up my own sandpaper. "I remember you mentioning it was quite an investment. Did it set you back much?" He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes scanning the cabin's familiar walls as if searching for an escape. A bit. Enough to make me rethink my strategies, that's for sure. It was a subtle dance, a careful excavation of information without revealing the extent of my discoveries. Each evasive answer, each deflected question, only solidified my suspicion that his financial situation was far more precarious than he'd let on. The learning experience was clearly an understatement. It was a financial catastrophe. As the seasons began to turn and autumn's crisp air gave way to winter's biting chill, the cabin became a more solitary retreat. The planned work sessions became less frequent, often postponed due to Mark's unforeseen commitments. The joint account, once regularly replenished, started to show only my contributions. When I inquired, he'd offer vague excuses: a delay in a payment he was expecting, an unexpected car repair, a medical bill. Each excuse was a flimsy thread in a web of deception that was growing more tangled by the day. The reality was becoming starkly clear. Mark wasn't just struggling, he was drowning, and our agreement, predicated on his financial recovery, was becoming increasingly unviable. The risk of him defaulting on our informal arrangement, and thus jeopardizing the cabin's security once more, was becoming a tangible threat. I had to find a more concrete solution, one that provided stability and protected the cabin from his continued financial instability. I decided to revisit my initial strategy, but with a crucial modification. Instead of allowing Mark to continue his erratic contributions to the cabin's upkeep, I would leverage my position as the sole holder of the mortgage to create a more structured repayment plan for him, one that directly addressed the debt I had absorbed. This would not be a punitive measure, but a necessary step to ensure the cabin's long-term security and to hold him accountable for the financial burden he had placed on me. I called Apex Asset Solutions once more, requesting a formal loan amortization schedule for the debt they had acquired. They provided it, a comprehensive document outlining the principal, interest, and escrow requirements. Armed with this, I scheduled a meeting with Mark, this time not at the cabin, but at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in town. He arrived on time, looking thinner than I remembered, the lines of worry etched deeper around his eyes. The forced joviality he'd tried to muster upon seeing me was quickly replaced by a somber resignation as he sat across from me. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice low. I slid the amortization schedule across the table. "Mark, we need to talk about the loan. And about your commitment to the cabin." He looked at the document, his face paling. "What is this?" "This is the loan. The one you took out without my consent," I stated, my voice devoid of accusation, but firm with purpose. "Apex Asset Solutions sold it to me, as you know. And now I have the official repayment schedule." He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the numbers. I thought we had a plan." "For the cabin." "We had a plan for the cabin's upkeep, Mark." I corrected him gently. "But that plan was contingent on your ability to contribute, and frankly, it wasn't addressing the debt itself. This is the debt, and it needs to be repaid." He looked up, his eyes filled with a familiar desperation. "But how? You know my situation." "I do," I admitted. "And that's why I'm not demanding immediate repayment of the full amount. That wouldn't be fair or realistic. But we need a formal agreement, one that's legally binding and ensures that the cabin is protected and that the debt is eventually cleared." I then outlined my proposal. "I'm proposing a structured repayment plan, Mark. You'll continue to contribute to the cabin's upkeep, but a portion of that will now be directly allocated towards paying down the principal of the loan. We'll set up a separate account for your loan repayments, separate from the cabin's maintenance fund. You'll make monthly payments, and I'll ensure those payments are applied directly to the loan." Quote. He listened intently, his initial fear slowly giving way to a flicker of pragmatic consideration. The idea of a structured, manageable repayment plan, rather than an insurmountable debt, seemed to offer him a glimmer of hope. "What kind of payments are we talking about?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I presented him with a repayment schedule that was significantly more manageable than the original loan terms, factoring in his current financial limitations, but also ensuring a steady reduction of the principal. It was still a substantial commitment, but it was a clear, achievable goal. "And if I can't, if things don't improve," he ventured, the specter of his past failures haunting his words. "That's where we have to be realistic, Mark," I said, my gaze steady. "This agreement will include a clause regarding default. If you miss payments or fall significantly behind, then we'll have to revisit the terms. And in the worst-case scenario, if the loan becomes unmanageable, then the cabin security will be at risk again. But I'm hoping, with this structured approach, we can avoid that." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my proposal. The casual, familial arrangement was gone, replaced by a stark financial reality. But in its place was a clear path forward, a defined responsibility. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice laced with a new, cautious respect. "You bought this debt. What's in it for you?" "For me," I said, leaning back in my chair, a quiet confidence settling over me, "it's about security. It's about ensuring that our family's legacy, our shared history, remains intact. It's about turning a potentially catastrophic situation into a manageable one. And frankly, it's about knowing that the burden I carried, the weight of this debt, is being systematically addressed." He looked at the amortization schedule again, then met my gaze. "I understand," he said, the words carrying a newfound sincerity. I appreciate you giving me this chance. A real chance. Not just another empty promise." The agreement was signed that afternoon. It was a cold, legal document, a far cry from the sentimental attachment we both had to the cabin. But it was also a lifeline. It provided structure where there had been chaos, and accountability where there had been evasion. In the months that followed, the dynamic at the cabin shifted again. Mark's contributions to the maintenance fund became consistent. His loan repayment deposits, though small, were regular. He still had unforeseen commitments that sometimes caused him to miss a scheduled work session, but he was always quick to reschedule to make up for lost time. The conversations we had when we did connect were more grounded, more pragmatic. We discussed budgets, discussed upcoming repairs, and even began to talk about potential renovations. The initial shock of his betrayal had long since faded, replaced by a pragmatic resolve. I had taken Mark's reckless act and transformed it into an opportunity for both of us to become more responsible stewards of our shared heritage. The cabin, once a symbol of his deceit, was slowly being rebuilt, not just physically, but metaphorically. We were no longer just co-owners. We were partners in a venture that required mutual commitment and transparency. However, the underlying issue of Mark's financial fragility remained a constant concern. The loan was being paid down, yes, but his overall financial health was still a question mark. The structured repayment plan was a temporary balm, not a cure. I knew that true reconciliation and true security for the cabin would require more than just debt repayment. It would require a fundamental shift in Mark's approach to his finances, a commitment to long-term stability rather than short-term fixes. One crisp winter evening, as snow gently fell outside the cabin's windows, Mark and I were sitting by the fireplace, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across the room. We had spent the afternoon patching a leaky section of the roof, a task that had required careful coordination and a shared effort. The conversation had been easy, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared memories. "You know," Mark began, his voice thoughtful as he stirred the embers with a poker. "This cabin, it means a lot to me, more than I realized, until I almost lost it." I nodded, watching the firelight reflect in his eyes. "It means a lot to me, too, Mark. I've been thinking a lot," he continued, his gaze distant, "about my finances, about how I got here. And I know this loan repayment is just a band-aid. It doesn't fix the underlying problem." A quiet hope flickered within me. This was the conversation I'd been waiting for, the one that acknowledged the deeper issue. "What are you thinking?" I asked, my voice soft. "I'm thinking I need to get my financial house in order," he said, turning to face me, a genuine earnestness in his expression. Properly, not just paying off this loan, but building something sustainable. I've been looking into some financial planning courses, and I'd been talking to a credit counselor. My breath hitched. This was more than I could have hoped for. This was genuine commitment to change, not just a temporary cessation of bad behavior. That's really good to hear, Mark, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. I'm really glad you're taking those steps. And I was thinking, he went on, a tentative smile gracing his lips, about the cabin. About how we could make it more of a stable asset. Not just something we visit, but something that could actually generate income. We always talked about renting it out for short stays, right? I looked at him, a surge of emotion washing over me. He was taking initiative, proactively seeking solutions, and looking towards a shared future for the cabin. This was not the same Mark who had leveraged our family legacy without a second thought. This was a Mark who was actively trying to rebuild, to atone, and to contribute. Yes, I agreed, my voice thick with emotion. We did. And I think that's a great idea. It would help with the loan, help with upkeep, and ensure the cabin continues to be a vibrant part of our family. We spent the rest of the evening discussing the practicalities of renting out the cabin. We talked about finding a reliable property management service, about setting up a booking system, and about how to split the income fairly, with a significant portion dedicated to further loan repayment and essential renovations. It was a collaborative discussion, one filled with a shared vision and a mutual understanding of the commitment involved. The journey from betrayal to reconciliation had been long and arduous, paved with uncertainty and veiled with Mark's evasiveness. But in that moment, by the warm glow of the fireplace, with the snow falling softly outside, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had navigated the treacherous currents of debt and deception, not by succumbing to anger or despair, but by seizing control, by strategically asserting my position, and by offering a path to redemption. The cabin was safe. The loan was being systematically paid down. And Mark, the man who had once threatened to dismantle our shared legacy, was now actively engaged in rebuilding it, not out of obligation alone, but out of a newfound understanding of its value and his own responsibility. The whispers of the pines, once laced with the ghosts of Mark's mistakes, now carried the gentle lullaby of a renewed commitment, a fragile but burgeoning hope for the future. The power had shifted, not to dominance or subjugation, but to a shared stewardship, a testament to resilience and the enduring strength of family, even when tested by the darkest of circumstances. The icy grip of dread had been replaced by a quiet, potent satisfaction, the knowledge that I had not only saved the cabin, but perhaps, in a small but significant way, saved a piece of our fractured family as well. The road ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, the path forward felt clear, and the future, though still a work in progress, held the promise of genuine renewal. The winter air, though crisp, held a warmth that hadn't been present for months. It wasn't just the crackling fire or the shared warmth of our conversation. It was the thaw of a long, frozen trust. Mark's words about financial planning courses and credit counseling were more than just hopeful pronouncements. They were the first tentative shoots of genuine change. He wasn't just talking about paying off the debt. He was talking about building a foundation, about creating a future where such desperate measures weren't necessary. The idea of renting out the cabin had always been a background hum, a topic we'd touched on in more optimistic times. Now it was becoming a tangible plan, a way to generate income that would benefit both of us and, more importantly, serve as a dedicated revenue stream for debt reduction and future upkeep. It was a shared goal that required collaboration, something that had been sorely lacking in our relationship for so long. We spent that evening poring over brochures from property management companies, discussing potential pricing strategies, and even debating the merits of various online booking platforms. Mark, surprisingly, had done his homework, presenting market research and outlining a preliminary budget that factored in cleaning costs, minor maintenance, and even a small contingency fund. It was a stark contrast to the vague excuses and deflected questions of the past. He was engaged, proactive, and most importantly, responsible. The following weeks were a blur of activity. We formally agreed on a partnership agreement for the rental venture, clearly outlining our respective roles and the distribution of profits, with a significant portion earmarked for the loan repayment. I secured a small business loan to fund necessary renovations, a fresh coat of paint for the exterior, updated linens, and a more robust Wi-Fi system, all designed to enhance the cabin's appeal to potential renters. Mark, true to his word, diligently attended his financial planning sessions and met regularly with the credit counselor. He kept me updated on his progress, sharing insights and even admitting to setbacks, but always with a renewed determination to overcome them. The first rental booking came in early spring, a weekend getaway for a couple from the city. Seeing the cabin, which had once been the epicenter of our conflict, now filled with the laughter and joy of new occupants, was a surreal experience. We had orchestrated this together. Mark was there, not as a debtor, but as a co-proprietor, helping with check-ins, ensuring everything was in order, and even offering local recommendations to the guests. He did so with a quiet pride, a genuine sense of accomplishment that radiated from him. The income generated from the rentals, even in those early days, was a welcome relief. The joint account, which had previously been a source of anxiety, began to feel like a symbol of our renewed partnership. Mark's loan payments, though still modest, were consistent, and each deposit felt like a step further away from the precipice. As the seasons changed, so did our dynamic. The conversations at the cabin were no longer laced with unspoken tension or the lingering threat of financial ruin. Instead, they were filled with practical discussions about bookings, guest feedback, and future plans for the property. We talked about expanding the rental offerings, perhaps adding a small hot tub or upgrading the kitchen to cater to longer stays. Mark's involvement was no longer a grudging obligation, it was an active contribution, a testament to his commitment to our shared legacy. One crisp autumn afternoon, as we were preparing the cabin for a particularly busy rental season, Mark sat down on the porch swing, the same porch railings he had once repainted with a new sense of purpose. "You know," he began, his voice softer than I remembered, "when all this started, when I first took out that loan, I was lost. Really lost. I thought I was doing the right thing, investing in something that would set me up for life. I was so caught up in the idea of quick success, I didn't even see the cliff I was running towards." I sat beside him, the familiar scent of pine needles filling the air. I didn't interrupt, allowing him the space to articulate what he had been holding on to for so long. "The shame of it all, it was crushing," he continued, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. "And then, when you found out, I expected you to explode, to cut me off. But you didn't. You helped me. You gave me a way out, not just from the debt, but from myself, in a way." A knot in my chest, one that had been tightening for years, began to loosen. It wasn't just about saving the cabin, it was about something more profound. It was about repairing a fractured relationship, about acknowledging the shared history that bound us, even when one of us had betrayed that bond. "We're family, Mark," I said simply, my voice catching slightly. "And family helps each other. It doesn't always mean fixing everything, but it means trying. And you've done a lot of trying." He turned to me, a genuine, unforced smile gracing his lips. It was a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that carried the weight of his journey. "I've learned a lot," he admitted. "About responsibility, about consequences, and about what truly matters. This cabin, it's more than just a property. It's a reminder of where I was, and a promise of where I want to be." The loan was gradually being paid down, its shadow receding with each successful rental and each timely repayment. Mark's credit score, once in tatters, was slowly but surely improving. He was building a solid financial future, not through reckless speculation, but through diligent work and a commitment to responsible living. The credit counselor had become a regular contact, not a source of shame, but a guide on his path to financial stability. The cabin itself was thriving. It had become a sought-after destination, a place where people came to escape the everyday and reconnect with nature. The income it generated was not only servicing the debt, but also allowing for ongoing improvements and upgrades. We even discussed the possibility of acquiring a smaller, adjacent property in the future, further securing our family's presence in this cherished place. There were still moments, of course, when the old anxieties would surface. A particularly slow rental month, a minor unexpected repair that exceeded the contingency fund. In those instances, the old patterns of panic and evasion could have easily resurfaced. But Mark met these challenges head-on. He would proactively adjust pricing, reach out to guests to offer incentives for future bookings, or take on small repair tasks himself to save on professional costs. His newfound sense of agency and responsibility was the true safeguard, far more potent than any legal document. One winter evening, much like the one where he had first spoken of his commitment to change, we found ourselves by the fireplace again. The cabin was quiet, a blanket of snow muffling the outside world. The conversation had drifted from rental income to distant memories, to the grandparents who had first built this haven. "You know," Mark said, his voice laced with a quiet contentment, "I never thought I'd be here, in this position. I was so convinced that my own financial brilliance would make me rich. I was so wrong. I was blind to the real value of what we already had." I looked at him, this man who had once been the architect of our shared disaster, now the partner in our shared revival. The transformation was profound, not just in his financial standing, but in his character. He had shed the recklessness, the entitlement, and embraced a sense of purpose and accountability. "It's easy to get caught up in the chase, Mark," I replied, reaching out to place a hand on his arm. "The important thing is that you found your way back, and that you're building something solid now." He nodded, a rare moment of vulnerability softening his features. "It's because of you," he confessed, his gaze meeting mine, direct and unblinking. "You could have thrown me to the wolves, but you chose to guide me." That meant more than anything. The truth of his words resonated deeply. I had chosen a path of confrontation and strategy, but it had been underpinned by a core belief in the possibility of redemption. I had demanded accountability, but I had also offered support. It was a delicate balance, one that had been tested to its limits, but one that had ultimately fostered a genuine and lasting change. The debt was no longer an insurmountable mountain, it was a manageable hill, steadily shrinking with each passing month. The cabin, once a symbol of Mark's financial recklessness, had become a testament to his resilience and a beacon of our renewed partnership. It was a place of shared memories, of hard-won lessons, and of a promising future. The whispers of the pines no longer carried the ghosts of past mistakes. They whispered of stability, of shared purpose, and of the quiet strength of family, rebuilt and fortified. The icy grip of dread had been replaced by a profound sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that not only had the cabin been saved, but a vital connection within our family had been mended, a testament to the enduring power of forgiveness, perseverance, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful. The road ahead still held its challenges, but for the first time in a very long time the path forward was illuminated, not by the blinding glare of crisis, but by the steady, warm glow of shared responsibility and enduring hope. The story of the cabin and the story of our relationship was no longer a narrative of debt and betrayal, but one of recovery, reconstruction, and a quiet, powerful renewal.